has been meditated upon, argued, and fought over for thousands of years. Hinduism is the world's oldest faith, and it brings together within it everything from the most soulful contemplation to the most boisterous rituals. Just under 80% of Indians define themselves as Hindus. India has been a majority Hindu country and the world's most diverse and plural nation for a very long time. But what does Hinduism really mean today? Can it address our deepest anxieties and our most pressing questions? Does it divide or does it unite? I will ask all those questions to some of the finest minds in the world in this very special series called Being Hindu. Welcome to my show Being Hindu. I'm delighted to welcome on my show today a very special guest, Padma Bhushan Dr. David Frawley, also known by his Indian name Vamadeva Shastri, is a unique scholar who straddles Western thought and philosophy and Indian ideas about its own philosophies and traditions and civilizations. He's an author of numerous books and articles on understanding India from a global perspective and understanding its unique thought and contribution to philosophy around the world. I'm delighted to welcome David Frawley. Thanks very much for being on my show.
Namaste. I'm very happy to be with you, Hindol.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by asking you, Dr. Frawley, when you look at Hinduism in the 21st century, when you look at it today, some people often ask, why does it seem so beleaguered? Because in a sense, many of its open-ended philosophies,
Yes.
which are constantly evolving and changing, are perhaps most suited for the 21st century.
Well, we have a twofold movement. Since 1893, with Swami Vivekananda, he brought this Yoga Vedanta movement to the West, which has also brought an interest in all aspects of Vedic knowledge, now also Ayurvedic medicine. We have people in the West doing mantras and asanas and following gurus and having names based upon the Indian tradition. And also a spread of Buddhism has also come out through the Tibetans and so forth. So that expansion is there. Now in India it's very interesting because India, with its becoming modern, it was dominated by Western philosophies, so that Hinduism in India is often looked at as something far more backwards or limited or according to older stereotype than the expansion of Hindu knowledge, Vedic knowledge that we've had globally, even though actually Vivekananda did both. He awakened the global, or he brought about the global yoga movement, but he also brought about an awakening of the Hindu Dharma Vedanta in India itself. So many Hindus in India feel that beleaguered oppression of modern India that's not acknowledging their traditions. So we find people in the West who are teaching yoga, Ayurveda, they're regarded as very progressive, they address the most affluent and educated part of the society, whereas in India, these same ideas are often looked upon as something backwards, out of date, or even contrary to the development of civilization.
What are the one or two ideas you think are most interesting in Hinduism in the 21st century as we go into a future, into the Anthropocene age where really technology has or will have the ability to transform what it means to be human? What are the one or two ideas from Hinduism, from Hindu philosophy that are most apt for the future that's coming?
Okay. There are so many ideas. There are so many ideas and teaching, hundreds and thousands of them. So it's important that we're open to their great diversity. But the first and most important one is the idea that there is a universal consciousness, that the universe is a self-aware being, and that universal consciousness is present within us as the core of our own deeper awareness behind and beyond the mind. So as we move into this age of greater expansion into the universe, science is looking for a greater field of consciousness, and there is a certain sense of cosmic consciousness, cosmic intelligence, cosmic awareness. Science fiction is bringing in its views, philosophy, psychology are bringing in their views. But the Hindu tradition, its philosophies and its sadhanas has always been aware of an idea or reality of cosmic consciousness and giving us practices to link ourselves to the cosmic mind, or we might say even the network of the cosmic mind, so that we're not just plugging into the human information network, but to the greater cosmic intelligence in special ways of doing that, times of the day, ways of connecting to the universe as a whole. So in this regard, Hinduism, I think, has the greatest cosmic vision of any religion, philosophy, way of thought that we have in the world today. It has thousands of years of experiences through various great sages. It has many approaches that have been preserved, so these can be adapted, modernized, brought into play. And Hindu Dharma, the sadhana, the spiritual practice, is always adjusted at the level of time, place, and person. And the individual practice is emphasized over any en masse belief or philosophy or faith. So these practical ways, through meditation, mantra, yoga, of accessing a cosmic awareness, of accessing the deeper intelligence behind nature. This is the great gift of Hindu Dharma. And this is what so many people globally are finding when they look into yoga, when they look into Vedanta, when they look into Buddhism, when they look into Ayurveda, ways of directly experiencing reality within our own consciousness beyond the biases of society, belief systems, institutions, and concepts.
The other question that I'm interested in is, when you think about being a Hindu in the 21st century, it also comes with issues, or some would say baggage, of things like caste.
Yes.
How ought we look at some of these issues? Because caste seems to be a problem that is alive and kicking in modern India today. And many people would ask if Hinduism truly is that evolved.
Yes.
It has so many, if it really has so deep and intricate a system of philosophy, how is it that issues like caste continue to be alive and well and vicious in modern day India?
Well, we have to separate social dimensions of what is going on in India and also the deeper spiritual traditions. Slavery existed in the Christian world and up to even less than, not much more than 100 years ago. They didn't have to throw out Christianity to counteract slavery. So there are social problems within Hinduism that do need to be addressed. But first of all, let's go back to the fundamentals within Hinduism as a way of addressing them rather than simply attacking Hinduism. Social stratification is an issue in all the cultures of the world. All traditional, particularly tribal societies, have strong divisions based upon birth. Traditional societies also had far fewer options of jobs. So you were often limited to the type of career and limitations of education. So you're limited to the type of career or your parents or your family. India as a country, particularly Hindus, were often under foreign rule, and under that there became this kind of defensive and protective mentality that went on. So if we actually look at the history of Hinduism, we don't find that this rigid caste idea was there all the time, and we also don't find that it's part of the deeper scriptures. It is more a social phenomenon in India that also affects other societies in India. So we need a definite reform by going back to primary ideas. And here let's look at the so-called origin of the caste system in the Vedas, which is the Purusha Sukta.
Yes.
And the idea of the Purusha, the head becomes the Brahman, the arms becomes the Kshatriya, and so forth. They're looking at that as stratification and caste oppression. But what you forget, the first thing that is teaching is that humanity is a single organism. There is one single social body. Not only that, the human Purusha is, if you look at the Purusha Sukta as a whole, is a manifestation of the cosmic Purusha. The universe is a single being like the human being. There is a single consciousness, a oneness of consciousness within us. This is the core teaching of Hindu Dharma, which we find in the Upanishads. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Not God is out there and somebody else. I am Atma Brahma, the self is Brahman. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. So the difficulty is the first teaching, Vasudeva Kutumbatam, we are one family. We are one social organism. There's a unity of consciousness. The dilemma in human society is we are one organism, but an organism has different functions. And the organism has different necessary functions. We can say the head is better, has more power, it has more prestige over the feet, but you don't want to have two heads and no feet. See, each has its particular place, and they all should serve the social organism as a whole. So that model of society is fairly organic and fairly ecological, but over time differentiations arise and caste hierarchies, social hierarchies arise. We find throughout the world this fourfold model of a priestly class, a aristocratic or military class, the merchant class, servants. These are kind of general ideas that occur. Unfortunately, in India, this became too stratified and too fixed by birth, whereas our activities should be based upon our gunas and karmas. And then we had in India, which is a positive idea, is that the individual should be doing karma yoga for the whole. Whether you're the king, whether you're the servant, whatever level you are on, you should be doing karma yoga for the whole, and we should recognize a unitary consciousness behind that. Now today we have to remember these systems were developed centuries ago. In fact, they were actually much more adaptable centuries ago. They need to be changed. They need to be given up and moved on. We have so many different jobs and occupations today. A person today may not have the same occupation their entire life. And now the machines are taking over the occupations. We now have a society which is not only people, it's also mechanical information and so forth. So there does need to be reform in Hindu society, and that has been going on. What has been unfortunate in modern India the last few decades is the so-called anti-caste interest or groups have been the most powerful for promoting caste, turning caste into a vote bank, and then turning people away from their identity as Indians or Hindus or a broader identity and identifying with the interest of that caste, and then you reward that caste with various populist measures and get them to vote for you. So the irony today is that in India it's a lot of the more leftist, socialist, anti-caste parties that are promoting the caste, and the more Hindu and other groups are saying we need national unity and we need to recognize again a common consciousness and a society based upon working for the good of all rather than on just our individual pleasure and happiness. I think we have a very good social model for the future. The Hindu idea is that each works for the good of all. One point I also want to mention, in the Vedas there's nothing like a Dalit or an untouchable. We start out in Rig Veda, you basically just have the Raja, the king, the princely class, the Brahmins, the priestly class, then you have the general term for the people. And then later on the Vish becomes the Vaishya, and then you have a division of a Shudra or a servant, that the people are divided into groups that are doing certain merchant roles and certain service roles. Much of this complexity of caste came quite a bit later, and there's no reason for even Hindus to think that it is part of their system and cannot be changed or shouldn't be changed.
Okay, perfect. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the history of Hinduism's interaction with science.
Yes.
And a lot of contemporary thought on science does not often recognize the contribution that the Hindus made and their philosophy made to the history of science, to the the creation of what we understand as modern science today.
Yes.
Could you throw a little light in this interview on what kind of contributions ought to be remembered and why they are not remembered?
Okay. The first thing to understand is Hinduism, unlike the belief-based religions, was never against science, was never against learning on any level, and it embraces, you'll find Hindu works on medicine, mathematics, science, astronomy, and so many things. There was never this church versus science debate. Now, science developed in the Western world, so they didn't understand what had been done in India, and unfortunately, India was under a lot of either foreign rule or foreign attack, particularly from the 13th century. So that when the Renaissance was going on in Europe, India was struggling to keep its own system together. Now, in terms of specific things, we know, of course, the decimal system came from India. The concept of zero came from India. But even if we look back at an ancient text like the Rig Veda, one of the most dominant numbers is 360, and 360 applied to the sky as a measurement of the heavens. The Vedic hymns are made in meters from 24 syllables to 48 syllables, with 36 being the medium. So along with this mathematical information we have in Vedic texts, for example, in Yajurveda, they have names for all the numbers from 1 Ekadasha, Shata Sahasra, all the way to 1 followed by 12 zeros after it. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, they talk about dividing the sky not only into 27 nakshatras, but into 27 upanakshatras, or 27 times 27, which is about a half degree division of the sky. We also have the medicine, the Ayurvedic medicine, which is the kind of the basis of the humoral system that the Greeks came up with. And above all, and what we have to remember, what we have in ancient India and throughout its history, is the study of the mind and the science of consciousness, which we still do not have in the Western world today. Sometimes I tell a little bit of a joke. In the yogic system, we have 7 chakras, from the basic human nature to the highest cosmic self-realization. And modern psychology, particularly the Freudian type, seems to be content with the first 1 or 2. So that science of consciousness is the great contribution of India. It's there in Hindu thought, Buddhist thought, Jain thought. Mathematics is also there, but mathematics is also aligned with sound, with mantra, with cosmic sound, with nada, with music, with vibrations. So these are also very important disciplines. We work with Ayurvedic medicine, the herbal healing, the massage, the panchakarma, the special Ayurvedic oils. Ayurveda has the largest set of different herbal pharmaceutical preparations of any herbal tradition in the world. There are tremendous resources there. And once we have repackaged Ayurveda as mind-body medicine, people regard it as something progressive. In the 19th century, they closed down the Ayurvedic schools in India, saying it's all backwards and regressive. So the Western world has not given adequate examination to the history of science and to the scientific contributions in India, and India's contribution of science and spirituality, or material science with the science of consciousness. And I'll also have to say art here, because in India, art and science were also not completely separated. So we have this beautiful temple building, or the design of the dance, the music. So these are also, and then these disciplines were connected with the energies of nature, the movements of directions, the rhythms of time, the rhythms of the seasons. So there's a wonderful new examination that is required. And as we do this, it's not only that we'll find that the India's traditions of yoga and meditation are profound, we'll also find a lot in their mathematics and all of that, whether it's Ramanujan today or going back to Aryabhatta and others in centuries past.
The other question that I wanted to ask you was, we are particularly concerned in history today, in the point of time that we are in today, about taking care of the environment. We are really concerned about whether ours will be the age that will destroy the world, in a sense, right? Hinduism, from what I understand, has been critically engaged with how to maintain the ecosystem, how to maintain the environment, and man's relationship with the natural world, right? Many of those lessons have been forgotten. I mean, India, for instance, faces ecological disaster in many parts, right? So if there's so much thought and philosophy that exists within Hinduism, and India is still almost 80% Hindu, why is this natural connection that we used to have with the environment, why is it broken today?
Well, several reasons. One, even though India is say 80% Hindu, a lot of the Hindus are not educated into their own traditions and teachings. And the educational system in India actually denigrates Hindu thought or ignores it. The average graduate of any school is not going to either know anything about Hinduism, or they'll have a negative opinion about it. And generally we have to understand economic and social problems are caused at economic and social levels. India is a country that has been highly socialistic, almost communist at times, And what happened in India is that socialism also stunted the country's economic and educational growth, just as it did in the Soviet Union and just as it did in China. And even though India has moved out of that kind of socialistic rulership, their influence in the educational system is still there. So if there were greater education in Hindu thought, then that environmental aspect of Hinduism, among many others, would be more instilled in the activity of the people today. But Hinduism is unique, and it says it doesn't say that nature is a creation of the divine. It says that nature and the divine are one. It's like the ocean. The manifest world is the waves on the top of the sea. The unmanifest eternal infinite is the depths of the ocean, but it is all one. We should honor the earth as our mother, as the Native Americans say, but we should honor the divine consciousness within the earth as being also that same consciousness within us. So my feeling or my view is that a lot of the problems of modern India have come because it has not embraced its traditions. There's an undue influence of Marxist thought in India. There's been an imitation of the West in many ways. The Ayurveda has not been given proper support by government, by education, and this is true of a lot of the other aspects. It's only because yoga was embraced in the West that I remember years ago I was doing a program on medical research in yoga. This is like more than 25 years ago. It's in Mumbai. And there were 10 of us. There were 9 Indian medical doctors, and I was the one representative of the Ayurveda at that point. So if we look at India since 1947, these Vedic, Vedantic, Ayurvedic, yogic principles have not been applied or understood or appreciated properly. And it's interesting to note that during the independence movement, they were actually more highly regarded. But the group that took power intellectually after the independence of India was actually much more anti-Hindu, pro-modern, pro-Western, pro-British, pro-Marxist than the independence movement itself. So it's my feeling that if Hindus go back to their prime insights in their traditions, and particularly the deepest level of those insights, they will have the teachings to not only modernize and reform, revolutionize India, but are also the same ideas and insights that we need for the world as a whole.
The other question before we come to the end of this interview, which I wanted to ask you was, is Hindu thought really confined only to India? Because at least from what I understand, if the thought is so universal, it ought to be applied anywhere, right? Yes. Why does it then get confined only to India?
Yes. Okay. Now, Hinduism has been in a modern renaissance since the 19th century, and particularly since Vivekananda. But much of this was just bringing Hindu thought into an English medium. A lot of the Hindu traditions have been quite alive in Sanskrit, regional languages, and other things. But this modern movement of Hinduism has definitely been there, and the global spread of Hindu teachings has also helped that. The problem with the Western world is, on one hand, they are embracing the spiritual yogic side of Hinduism, but some of them in their minds still tend to identify Hinduism with caste, with curry, with cows, with limited things. So the question with them is always educating them better as to what the Hindu Dharma is overall, because the Hinduism has been subject to the greatest negative propaganda of any religion in the world, historically and today. And I'm saying this because the massive missionary propaganda by the Christians against the Hindus. Swami Vivekananda once said, if India takes all the mud at the bottom of the sea and throws it back at America, it will only be doing a fraction of what the missionaries are doing in India. And that hasn't totally ended. Maybe it's changed in different ways, or it's coming more through education, media, or other ventures. The Marxist propaganda, the leftist propaganda in India has also been extremely anti-Hindu, and even today Hindu social practices will be criticized, but not those of other religions, even if practices that may be worse. So this propaganda against Hinduism has been very strong. The British also did that, and even today the British haven't still quite forgiven India and the Hindus or Mahatma Gandhi forever for what occurred. So these distortions are out there. And we also see that in the academic world, what is often taught about Hinduism is not very positive. So what we say is, if you look at the West, the Hindus are the most affluent and, educated of the immigrants and minority religions, except for the Jewish people. I say take them to a Hindu temple and talk to the people. Hindus vote 80% Democrat. They're not caught running after fascist type figures and all these things, as the India left likes to denigrate them as. And then we also have to look back at identity. See, one of the problems we have with Hinduism is the term Hindu. And on one hand, the true religion is called Sanatana Dharma. It's called Manava Dharma, Arya Dharma. It's a way of universal knowledge. It is not defined relative to one community or geography after or another. But in the course of history, it's been given this name Hindu, largely because of the region, Sapta Sindhu, which we find in the Vedas already. And so what's happened today, that is the accepted term. So for example, in America, children, Hindu children, you're identified as a Hindu. So you can't throw that word out. But we have to define it properly. I know some Hindus say, I don't want to be called a Hindu. I'm a Vaishnava, I'm a Shaivite, I'm a Sanatani, I follow the Sanatana Dharma. That's very good. But when you go to, if you want to establish a school, a non-profit school, legality of marriage in a foreign country, we have to use the Hindu word. The Hindu word is not a bad word. It is just another designation. And it also has historical connections. Sapta Sindhu became Hapta Hindu. But you have to understand, even in the Vedic thought, Sapta Sindhu is not just a geographical term. Indra releases the 7 rivers to flow into the sea, destroying the powers of avidya, or ignorance. So they're the powers of the Sapta Loka, the 7 chakras. And Chinese also called India Indu, Hindu, or they related Indu to the moon. So let us not make a big issue of semantics, but let us understand what the teaching and what the tradition represents and how it views itself. One of the big problems we have in the West is that the Hindu religious studies department are largely run not only by non-Hindus but anti-Hindus, whereas the departments for Christians, for Jews, for Muslims are usually run by people who are supportive of those particular traditions. So Hindus have to do a new job educating and showing what their tradition really means. Because what's happened is a negative view has been projected out there and it hasn't been challenged enough in an articulate way. And more of that is happening. Hindu is a more positive term in the United States, I believe, today than it may be in India today. Because of the success of that particular community. And I've noticed over the last few decades, Hinduism is becoming a much more positive term in India, but it's a question of what it actually stands for. And that breadth of spiritual, yogic, meditative teachings, art, culture, is unparalleled in all the religions and philosophies of the world. It's older, it's vaster, it's also more adaptable. That some restricted thing was done in the past is not a rule that you all have to follow today. Manusmriti is a book of 2,000 years ago. It actually looks pretty good as a law code 2,000 years ago. Any law code of 2,000 years ago is not going to look very politically correct today. So Hinduism has its great living gurus who are adapting the teaching. We have modern figures from Ramana Maharshi to Sri Aurobindo to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to Sri Ravi Shankar to Pramukh Swami. There's so many. I'm just mentioning a few in passing. Let us look to that and let us look to the Hindus as a living community and their contributions. There's wonderful literature on all aspects of life. Aurobindo alone wrote thousands of pages on all aspects of life. Vivekananda. And then even today, so many teachers are doing that wonderful literature. We need to get those teachings out. And when we do, the world embraces these teachings as a way of universality and a way of the future. At the same time, Hindus do need to defend their tradition from distortions. They can be legitimately outraged at what is being said or what is being done. They need to vote, they need to take a political stance, just as all other groups are doing. They need to address modern realities. but it's my view that if we present Hinduism in a simple, clear, modern, experiential way, such as you've done in your book, Being Hindu, it will open up a whole new dimension, not only of understanding Hinduism for people, but understanding the whole of life.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Frawley. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.